Hi, everyone. Okay, David, I think we can start when you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving us your time for this, which is the first webinar that we created for the TRUUD project, looking at different concepts in how to make changes. At the background of our project, we're currently in the process of developing interventions, and I thought it'd be useful to put some different voices and different ideas into the discussions. So I'd like to introduce MakeSpaceForGirls. So just to give you a bit of an overview on the webinar, I'm going to give a brief overview of the TRUUD project and then hand over to Susanna Walker, who will talk about MakeSpaceForGirls. She'll talk for about 30 minutes. Then we'll have time for questions, and then close about 2 o'clock unless we finish early. Just with everything, I'd like to give the acknowledgements to the TRUUD funders. We're funded through the UK Prevention Research Partnership, and we're looking at this from a lot of different perspectives, and I think that gives us quite a lot of depth in terms of the sort of things that we can actually look at and explore, and I think that's one of the strengths of our project. So to give a bit of background, TRUUD comes from an initial funding project back in 2018, 17, 18. It was called Upstream, and it was trying to identify where where we can make changes to this system to try and understand where the problems are, but look at it from multiple different perspectives, looking at planning, looking at our governance, and just trying to understand where health impacts can be changed within the system. So TRUUD then came from that. It's 5 universities, just about 35 to 36 different academics working on it. We're about 2.5 to 3 years coming up through the project, and with looking at how to reduce non-communicable diseases from the way we design our towns and cities. So just a quick graphic here, looking at how we rethink space. A lot of countries like the Netherlands, Paris more recently, have made changes to their urban realm, and it makes a huge impact on people's health. So we're looking at what we can do in the UK in this respect. So the main aim was to work with communities, in the urban decision-making processes, and that's gone through primary engagement, conducting economic evaluation, looking at programs, involving the public in discussions, sharing any knowledge, and also interestingly, we're looking at through a meta-research evaluation for the project, trying to understand the work we're doing and how we work together, how we bring all these different disciplines together to actually make a coherent argument that can make a real and lasting change. We have a couple of case studies. We're focusing on Bristol and Manchester. One of them is the Frome Gateway, which is just near the M32. The site's being redeveloped. Currently doesn't have a lot of people living within the site, but they're looking to expand on housing, moving it from being I think it's a lot of warehouses and things that have closed. And the second one is more of a policy in Manchester, looking at streets for all, trying to understand how we can make the spaces usable and for everyone that wishes to access them. We have support, as you can see, hopefully here, from Marvin Rees and Andy Burnham for the project. So, as I say, we've been going for a couple of years now. We've got the identify some problem spaces that seem to come up in the interviews, the workshops, and the roundtables, all the different ways we've tried to gather information, and these key themes kept coming back up in terms of car-centric culture, local authority influence, the lack of planning clarity and responsibility, policies don't necessarily align in terms of health benefits, health seems to be quite peripheral to how we make decisions. Another thing which will come back this webinar is about is diversity inclusion, making sure that we design our urban spaces for as many people as possible. Another thing is really understanding the health impacts, looking at that sort of quite a quantitative approach. And then certainly in the planning system, it's the short-term profitability over the sort of the long-term benefits. So I say we've got 4 intervention design areas. We're looking at national property, national transport, trying to work with government, trying to identify where there are gaps in our guidance and policies that can implement health, putting health high on the agenda that can then feed through down to the urban areas. We've also got working with Transport for Greater Manchester Combined Authority, working on Streets for, as I said, and Bristol City Council on Frome Gateway. And then if any other interventions sort of come up in that time and space, then we'll work on those within the next couple of years. We're currently in the process of sort of really identifying those, working with our partners to try and see what we can deliver. Okay, so that brings us on to today's webinar. As I said, Make Space for Girls is sort of piques my interest. Having a 10-year-old daughter, I think it's a very useful idea to sort of understand, making sure who we're making this space for, how we're making it inclusive. So back in 2020, just as lockdown happened, on my last day, I bought a very influential book called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, and I highly recommend it to everyone who hasn't read it. It's, as I say, with a 10-year-old daughter, it's quite frustrating, and for my wife, the things where we don't have information about the impacts on women. But one of the things that really sort of stood out was, in terms of designing spaces for women, was that from the age of 10, girls' presence in parks decreases significantly. And we need to know and understand why and how we use spaces. So that sort of why I contacted Susanna to try and put this webinar on. So I'll now hand over to Susanna for her presentation.
You're on mute, Susanna.
The old favourite. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, Invisible Women is basically why Make Space for Girls started, because Caroline Criado Perez just covers in a few pages the disadvantages suffered to girls in parks and public spaces. And I am a feminist, and I have a teenage daughter, and I'd never thought about it. And out of this, we suddenly discovered that there was a huge gap in people's thinking, but also that some really good work has been done elsewhere. And that's how Make Space for Girls came into being. So on that note, we'll start here. So right at the point when I'd read Invisible Women, but wasn't really quite sure what to do with it, I started asking teenage girls that I met whether they went to the park. And this was the response of Lily, who just looked at me and went, why would I go to the park? There's nothing there for me. And that's, in a nutshell, is why Make Space for Girls exist, because parks and public spaces do not cater for teenage girls. And that's something that has all sorts of implications. So Make Space for Girls is a relatively new charity. We've been going for about 15 months. We campaign to make parks, recreation grounds, playing fields, any kind of public space as welcoming to teenage girls as they currently are to teenage boys. This means radically rethinking how we use and provide for teenagers in these spaces. It's about getting councils and developers to try something new, which is why it's brilliant to be here, because one of the things we've learned is we've got to get these ideas about diversity and gender in early. Once somebody's decided to build a skate park, it's quite hard to persuade them otherwise. So but also a lot of what's going on is actually about core urban design. And so only by start thinking about diversity and inclusion right at the start can things be done differently. So this is what we're aiming for. A public space which has lots of options for teenage girls, where they can be active, where they can sit around with their friends, where there's a range of things that they want to do. And this is all based on conversations with teenage girls, either that we've done or that's been part of other research. And I'll break down what's going on here gradually in the course of the seminar. The reality at the moment is really different. There's a great piece of work that was done in Glasgow last year, where a group of girls and young women were mentored by YWCA in Scotland, and they chose to look at safety in parks and public spaces. Their survey showed that only 20% of girls and women felt comfortable in their chosen park. So this is in lockdown, so everyone is outside, but it's the park that they've chosen to go to. So it's the one that they feel best. Still, only 20% felt good in it. In York, Friends of Roundtree Park have done some really interesting work talking to girls in their park. 90% of the girls who were into skating, teenage girls who were into skating, said they don't feel comfortable in the skate park. We've just done a survey on this. 70% of girls said they felt that some boys didn't, made them feel that they weren't wanted in the skate park. Nature England survey, girls were almost twice as likely as boys to say other people make me feel uncomfortable. Girls are not feeling that they belong in public spaces. And frankly, there's quite a good reason for it, because they're really badly served by them. So whenever we build things for teenagers or put out guidance about what this should be, there's a holy trinity, which is the skate park, the Muga, which is the multi-use games area, the fenced pitch or a basketball court, and the BMX track. Maybe, if you're lucky, a shelter. But all of these, for a whole host of reasons, are dominated by boys. It's partly due to interests, partly due to the way that boys use space, and also partly to do with how girls see themselves and how other people behave towards them. But there's a temptation sometimes to try and fix the girls and say, oh, well, let's teach all the girls to skateboard. And it's like, no, we need to step back and go, what do the girls actually want to do? What are they telling us they need from public space so that they can use it? So, as I said at the beginning, the work that's been done has predominantly been done in Europe. There is very little research that has happened in this country at the moment about teenage girls in public space. We've just done one piece of work with Women in Sport and Yorkshire Sport in looking at 3 parks up in Yorkshire, and that's coming out in the summer. But this is literally the first work that has been done. But elsewhere, in Sweden, from the age of 8, and we make space for girls and we talk about teenage girls, but really we're talking about girls from the age when they are going places on their own. Parents are great enforcers of equity in all sorts of ways. So in Sweden, they felt that from the age of 8, that's when it happened. But the imbalance between boys and girls in parks was 80-20. Girls didn't want to ask older boys if they could join in a game. And frankly, I'm surprised they even bothered asking 50% of the time, because in a glorious bit of Germanic translation, 87% of the time they were rebuffed, quote, with sexual insults. We all know what that is. So girls work round boys. We see this a lot with skate parks. Teenage girls get up early in the morning to go to the skate park when the boys aren't there. I talked to one girl who said, oh, I go when it's after it's been raining. Surface is a bit rubbish, but there are no boys there. Girls know that there's a problem. Girl Guiding, who are almost the only people who survey girls separately, 82% of girls thought they should be more involved in designing parks and public spaces. But in the UK, that's pretty much all we know. Sorry, this is really twitchy. I hate you sometimes. So let's just drill down a bit into the most common provision, which is Mugas and skate parks. Now, Biz is quite feisty. She lives in the town I live in. And she said about our local Muga that even if she knows some of the boys, it still feels uncomfortable going in. And this is, to some degree, it's a design feature. Mugas are the most common provision for teenagers. We don't know how many there are. We don't know what's been spent on them, but there are hundreds, possibly thousands of them. And they are dominated by boys. Everybody informally knows that they are dominated by boys, but there's no research and it's never quite been proven. And we've got no way of, nobody's ever just gone and counted. We, however, stood in a park a few weeks ago, looked at the usage of Muga over a weekend, 4 hours a day. 60 people used it, 3 of them were girls. This is kind of what everybody knows. And there is research elsewhere in Europe that shows that where there's a hard surface play area like that, it tends to be dominated by boys, and girls play more in a playground where that isn't there. And in a way, none of that is surprising. They are very easily territorialized by the strongest group, and they have high fences and narrow entrances. It's not a space that feels good to girls. I'd be concerned if there was a big group of teenage boys in a Muga. As a grown woman, I would be nervous about walking in. Teenage girls are very, very good at knowing where a potential trap is, and they won't use it. So they're not provisioned for teenagers, they're provisioned for a certain number of teenage boys. Skate parks, ditto. Izzy was skating in the car park, and I said, why are you skating in the car park when there is a skate park just up the road? And she said, oh, we're not good enough, the boys just heckle us off. So again, skate parks are very heavily territorialized by boys. Skateboarding itself is a very male-dominated sport. We've worked with Skateboard GB's statistics, and they say 80%, 85% are male, and we reckon that it's about 7% of teenage boys who skateboard and 2% of teenage girls. So it's a very heavily male-dominated sport, but it's also, frankly, quite sexist. In its structure, and boys feel that they are entitled to be on the skate park and girls aren't. We've heard of girls who've had rape threats, we've heard of girls who've had stones thrown at them. They are very heavily territorialized by the boys, which is why the girls go at times when the boys aren't there. And there's also a problem with skate parks in that they actually keep girls out of the park. There was a brilliant bit of research that I'd love somebody to redo in the UK, where they fitted teenage girls in 2 cities in America with activity trackers, and there's a whole wealth of research that came out of this. But for me, the most telling is where they looked at activity levels versus proximity to park. The closer the teenage girls were to a park, the more exercise they did, unless that park was a skate park, in which case their activity levels were below the average. We've seen that happening in the UK as well. We spoke to a council down on the south coast who talked to their local teenage girls about, said, we've got a small amount of money, what do you want in the park? They said, we want a gate in that fence over there, so we don't have to walk past the skate park on the way out. So we promote skate parks as good provision for teenagers, but they're actually deterring teenage girls from activity. Yeah, skateboard. This is from the Skateboard GB website. This is on their page for skateboard lessons. I mean, it's so uninclusive in so many ways. So this is kind of what we're up against. So why does this need to change? Fairness, that, obviously it's just a basic question of human rights. Health, I don't need to tell you people about this, but activity levels are bad in teenage girls, mental health levels are bad. Safety, teenage girls need a right. They basically just need the right to be able to be outside in public space. And for me, that's also about feeling that you belong in the community. Because at the moment, our parks and public spaces tell girls that they belong at home. And I don't like that. Now, the law, this is where it gets interesting. Under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, teenagers have a right to play up to the age of 18, which is odd because so many play spaces say under 12s only on them. So there is a duty to provide facilities for teenagers. But under the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty, councils also have to not just consider equality in their decision making, but redress discrimination. And suddenly, MakeSpaceForGirls jumps up the agenda a bit. Like I said, I'm preaching to the converted here, but teenage girls are always seen as a problem. They're not active and they have much higher levels of mental health issues than boys. But as there's a great piece of footage that somebody sent me where they were doing some consultation in the park. This girl just goes, well, how do you expect me to be active when I don't have anything to be active on? And that's it. We're telling them all the time that they're wrong, but we're not giving them anything to actually be more active with. Safety and security is a huge thing. And we have to accept that one of the problems is, as I mentioned in terms of skate parks, the levels of sexual harassment that girls get. And there are ways around that in design, and it's about basically not putting the teenage spaces in a dark corner, but actually in bringing teenagers into the body of the park where it's busy and stuff is happening, rather than putting the skate park in the far darkest corner and then wondering why the girls don't go there. And for teenage girls, it's not just about not being attacked. For them, when you ask them about feeling safe, It's about feeling that they belong in a space, that they're not going to be tutted at. And that's really crucial in terms of how things need to work. Public sector equality duty is really important to us because it requires councils and other public bodies to advance equality of opportunity, which means that if I live in a town that has a skate park, a BMX track and a Muga, and I'm trying to persuade the council that spending more money on a refurbished skate park does not conform to the public sector equality duty. Now, it's a carrot more than a stick, because councils have to show that they've considered it. They can still decide to do the skate park, but it does mean that the needs of teenage girls do move a lot further up the kind of to-do list. It's not an it's nice, it's an actually you've got a duty to. But when we've talked to planning barristers and things, it seems that equalities don't get much considered in planning. And we think that this is something not just for teenage girls that needs to be considered far more in the planning of urban spaces in general. So, sport versus play. Some girls do love sport, but lots of them don't. And especially for teenage girls, there's a whole lot of reasons why they don't like it. Women in sport are doing a great job on getting teenage girls involved in sport. So that's not what we're about. We're about play. Play is free and optional. And if you think about a lot of what we provide for teenagers, it's quite didactic. Play football here, skateboard here. We don't give them play spaces, but actually when you talk to teenagers, that's what they want. And play is increased activity levels. Swings, which lots of teenage girls want, we'll get onto that, actually were created the highest activity levels in teenage girls in parks in America in a recent study. So what do teenagers want? They want a space that is ours, and that's really important, because the one thing that skate parks do is they tell teenagers that it's okay to be there. And we need to create things that tell teenage girls that it's okay to be there. They want to be hidden but seen. Now, this sounds weird, but it makes sense. They don't want people staring at them, but they do want to be in the middle of things. And the very elegant solution to this is, I have a friend who has teenage daughters in London, and they always go to a particular tree in the park. It's right by the crossroads, so there's lots of traffic, they feel safe, but it's got branches that come down to the ground. So they feel safe, but they're not being stared at. That's what they want. They want to play, and they hate the fact that so much play equipment is now fenced off for little kids, but there's nothing for them. They want to play on the climbing frame. And perhaps if I ask people to have one takeaway from this, it will be many areas. Every time you create one space like a Muga or a skate park, it can be territorialized by the most dominant group. And that means it's not just that teenage girls don't get a look in. There are plenty of teenage boys who aren't accessing these spaces either. So the more we break up parks and public spaces into lots of different areas that can be accessed by lots of different people, the better job we're doing for increasing activity levels. So all teenage girls are not made the same, obviously, and there are big issues, particularly around religious and ethnic groupings who have very different family attitudes to how they can access the outdoors. So that has to be considered. Also, just basic location. You can build the most lovely park, but if teenage girls have to walk through a grim underpass to get there, they're not going to use it. The classic trap with consulting with teenage girls is, well, we ask the users of the park. They're not in the park. This happens particularly with skate parks, where there is not a skate park in Britain that has a decent beginners area, because the rules say the best way of building a good skate park is to consult the users. They don't want a beginners area. They're not beginners. Do talk to teenage girls on their own. They will say very different things, particularly about harassment. They're in an odd relationship with teenage boys. They like them, they're friends at school, they're difficult. Some other teenage boys harass them. They need spaces and time to speak on their own. And so the target is parks where teenage girls can have a range of choices about what they do and how they do it and what's there for them. So now the fun stuff. What does better look like? Because the great thing about this is, because some work has been done in Europe, we know what works for teenage girls, and we know what makes parks better for them, and we know what attracts them to public spaces. Better lighting, obviously, there's quite a lot. There is now some work being done on this in the UK. And if people want to talk to me about it, I'm very happy to talk to you about it in more detail. Circular paths, not dead end paths, paths that give you a choice about where you go so you can get away from a dodgy situation. The best option is a path around the perimeter of any space. Smaller areas, I've said this. Social seating. Girls hate park benches because they really want to face each other when they talk. And in one brilliant bit of feedback, this girl just said, yeah, we hate the benches. It means one of us always has to get a gravelly bum. They want to look at each other. It's not difficult. It's picnic benches. But again, a choice of different ones, not just the one bench in the shelter. Swings, gym bars and hammocks. These are the things that come up time and time again in any consultation. Also, interestingly, adults really want swings, big swings that fit adults. You can't get too many of them. Performance spaces. We've all seen the teenage girls doing their TikTok dances on walls and in little corners and things. They love a stage and good quality toilets. So the first people to really tackle this were in Vienna as part of their whole policy on gender mainstreaming. And they took as a case study Einsiedler Park, which is, they call it a small square, I'd call it quite a big square, where the girls were walking through but not stopping on their way to and from school. There was a Muga, but the first thing they did was just put up little things that would attract the girls to just linger a bit. So they put up hammocks, and as you can see, a thing that could be a stage or could be a bench. It's again sort of an open-ended invitation to play. And then they broke up the Muga. What you can't see is that on the right-hand side, the whole wall has been moved out. But they put in, again, a thing that can be interpreted and have things done with it. It's a stage, it's a seating area, it's a barrier, but it's separated the Muga into different spaces, and one of which is not painted with lines, it's not telling you what to do, and then the girls used it all more. Now, this is a later thing in Vienna. This is the stage. They canvassed the teenage girls in the area. That's what they said they wanted. But it's great. It's a community asset because you can use it for all sorts of events and stuff. But the thing I really like is they've labelled it as the girls' stage. Because again, it's that signal to teenage girls that it tells them that they are meant to be here and that this is their space. Malmö's really interesting. They had a policy of taking small corners of the urban fabric and creating parks out of them. After a while, they had built out of 14 parks, 12 skate parks, and they were 80% used by boys. So for the next one, they worked entirely with girls and young women. And let's just go on. And so this is what they built. It's got the different spaces. It's got the bars. Those kinds of gymnastic bars used to be in all the parks and they've just somehow disappeared. But they're a really simple, cheap solution for attracting teenage girls. There's a stage off to the left. There's a climbing wall. And what's interesting about this, though, is that the research showed that even though it had been entirely designed by teenage girls, that space is now used 50-50 between girls and boys. The dial is so far set towards boy dominant that even just getting it done entirely by girls only resulted in it being 50-50. I love this park because it's really jolly, but also it's just in the space of a single Muga. They worked with teenage girls to create a playful, fun space. And it's got some stuff, it's got some basketball hoops, it's got a swing, but it's also just got markings that are fun and offer you up stuff to do with. It's got the bench in front of it. It could be a stage, it could be a seat. I love it because it's got the shelter integrated into the park. So you're not going, oh, here is the teen shelter, you can all smoke in the middle of the field. It's actually as part of the activity. And I've also seen in Russia, they do swings that have lids on them. And why not? I mean, God knows the weather is worse there. But, you know, why don't we just think outside the box about what shelter actually means? And in the corner, there's social seating under shelter. So it's all integrated and it all feels safe. And it looks great. But it also, when you see this picture, you see just how much we're redressing the balance. Look at all those pitches. 10 to 1 on, they are 75-80% used by boys and men. That's, you know, that's a small space has been given over to teenage girls. But this is what is happening up and down the country. The pitch, football, rugby. Oh, the girls aren't very active. I wonder why that is. Swings are fantastic. And one way of telling teenage girls they're welcome in a park is to build big grown-up size swings that say, yes, you are meant to be here. I mean, this is in a top of the range park. Obviously not everyone can do this, but it just shows how interesting things can be and how it includes disabled facilities as well as big swings, small swings. Everybody is welcome. We put this on Twitter, and actually the main reaction from people on Twitter was, sod the teenage girls, can I have some of this, please? You know, grown-ups want it too. But like I said, swinging, actually really quite active. Superkillen in Copenhagen. Now, Superkillen is interesting because it's not designed by teenage girls, but it is designed in a whole raft of different ways to be an inclusive space. So there's two key things about it. One is it has lots of different shelters and seating spaces. So if your one group's taken over one, you can go and have another. It's got non-prescriptive spaces, but through the whole thing is a footpath. It's a very long, thin strip, and the spine of it is a footpath and a cycle path. So there are always people passing through. There's always that traffic. And being around other people is what makes teenage girls and frankly everyone else feel safe. CCTV cameras, they don't care. It doesn't help. If something bad happens and they get caught, that's not what we want. They don't want something bad to happen in the first place. And the best way of designing that out is by having other people. But Superkillen also has the be all and end all. It's the social seating meets the swing. It's in fact, in this case, it's grown woman heaven as well. What you can't see is that it's 5 degrees and there's a massive wind chill factor, but I am standing there queuing for these swings because they are so popular. And again, it's a lot cheaper than a skate park. So that's basically, I think I've kind of, we've put together some other ideas based on conversations with the teenage girls. Bottom right, they're quite into gym equipment, but gym equipment is often lined up so you can't talk to anybody else and they want to go and exercise with their friends. Now, rumour has it, but we've never tracked it down, that somewhere in South Gloucestershire, there are recumbent exercise bikes arranged like the spokes of a bike wheel, and that they are crawling with teenage girls, but we don't know. This is just a rumour, but it's a good idea and they want it. Also, climbing up high helps you feel really safe. So spaces where you can get up to, but again, that are not prescriptive. Hammocks we've done, bars we've done, performance spaces, really good. There's so much more I can say. And actually, there are lots more interesting examples about shelters, about swings, about all sorts of things that I'm really happy to share with people. We've done quite a lot of work on consulting now as well, and we can help with that. And basically we can help, and we're here to talk to people, and that's what we're here to do. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Susanna. That was really interesting. Certainly, as a like I say, for my daughter, there's a real sort of passion for her for climbing and things. And at school, she has the bars, and the girls are all queuing up to use it while the boys play football. She has tried playing football as well, but like I say, it gets a bit more boisterous as she gets older. So having those spaces she can go to, the school's done quite well with that. But you take them to parks, and the ones they seem to enjoy the most are the ones with the climbing frames and things like that. So it's really nice to see those ideas, and certainly, as you say, for older teenagers, and then like you say, adults as well who like to use those spaces. So I'd just like to say thank you and open up to questions if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. Okay, Lisa.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really, really enlightening. And I agree with, everything you presented, of course, but I just had one reflection, which was the sort of gendered perceptions. And I know that there's a real problem with the skate park, but then with the solution of, having a stage for performance and having chit chats area for girls, like, how do we avoid this gendered perspective of, boys go to the skate park and football, and girls, they, perform? Like, how do we make it more inclusive?
Really good question. I think I've got a lot of answers to that. I think the number one is that a lot of these ideas come out of what teenagers say. And although we are advocating for teenage girls. Actually, teenage boys want a lot of this as well. That not that many of them necessarily want the skate park and the football. And when there's a woman called Julia King who works for the LSE, who's done a lot of work with teenagers across the board in Brent, and she was working with a developer, and the developer had gone, oh, well, we'll just build a skate park. And actually this mixed group said, we don't want a skate park, we want places to sit and chat. That it's the gendering is almost imposed on them. I think skate parks are a really specific problem, and the best answer to that is actually to have a indoor skate parks, which are much more equal. I do know what you mean. I think some of it is, like I said, that actually boys want a lot of these things as well, and you end up being much more inclusive. But Eva Kyle, who began the gender mainstreaming work in Vienna, says she got a lot of flack for building a housing development that was based around the fact that women tend to be the primary caregivers for children. And she said, you have to build for where we are now, not for where the utopia we want to live in. And I think that's true. If teenage girls are saying that's what they want, then we build that, we get them into the parks, then you tackle the discrimination. I think what's running under a lot of this as well is the levels of sexual harassment, which basically means that girls are very reluctant to do significant sporting activity outdoors because they're going to get shouted at. And they feel it attracts male attention, and they would mostly prefer to do sport inside or in a hidden place. So in terms of actually increasing activity levels in girls, you have to look sidelong at things like swings, but also just at the incidental exercise of them going to the park and feeling that they are in the park, and going for a walk through the park is better than not going to the park at all. I think as things are, expecting them to suddenly all start playing football you can't make that happen right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. But actually that was one of the other things I thought as well, is that a lot of the problems are behavioral. And of course we have some answers through organizing the public space, but then it's not all the answer. If the main problem is harassment, then there's so much we can do. Yeah,
it's not creating utopia, but it's like I said, the best example is just this creating lots of different spaces. So if you've got a dominant group that are going to be idiots, then you can just give people other places to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we had a message in the chat from Michael Martin saying, I'm not able to pronounce that, Viborg has an example of a shelter, so we can share the chat with that later. And the next question we have from Vicky.
Yeah, I think, we just have to be a little bit careful in saying, you're almost implying that skate parks and things are not good things. I think it's more a question of providing facilities that suit lots of different facilities that suit different people, and they can choose to go to. Skate parks are good for people who want to skate, a lot of them. And, whilst, I can think of some fantastic skate parks like Victoria Park in Bath, where they have a massive range of sort of skate facilities and things, and my son's a big skater, and, we had to go all the way from Bristol to take him to it, and so I think, the need to design things that are more appealing to girls, I absolutely agree with, but I just think we just need to be a little bit careful in saying, we shouldn't be doing things like skate parks. It's a really, kind of creative and social and active sport, and we shouldn't be discouraging people.
No, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that they shouldn't be the only facility. And at the moment, they are predominant. That and football pitches are the only facility. They are also very expensive. That, hundreds of thousands of pounds when to cater for across the board with teenagers. Skateboarders are 7.8% of the population. So I would argue that actually we are also working to try and create more inclusive skate parks, But I do question whether council should be spending hundreds of thousands of pounds. You know, we don't spend it on other stuff like bouldering. You're expected to go indoors, and actually indoor skate parks are much more egalitarian. So yes, to some degree, I am questioning whether councils should be building any more skate parks for a while, until something, you know, until skateboarding is less sexist, but also until they are creating more inclusive facilities for a larger proportion of the teenage population.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, I think, you know, I totally agree with you. And, you know, we in Bristol, you probably know, in Lockleys and things, we designed a big stage and things with the children, and you know, that's really well used. And yeah, we are broadening things out. But I think, you know, that what worries me is that we seem to sort of be going down the route that, well, girls like to sit, and that's not really helping their health much. You know, just providing hangout spaces for them where they can get Wi-Fi from the local sort of youth provision. You know,
the ancillary exercise of them getting to the park is better than them not getting to the park, because it's one of the discussions we keep having with Healthy Streets and Living Streets people is, unless there is something for teenage girls to go to, we can't persuade them to active travel. You know, that it's the swings certainly are good exercise, but actually at the moment, simply persuading them to leave the house and go to the park is a significant increase in their activity levels. And the research in America seems to suggest that most of the increased activity levels in teenage girls comes from them just going to the park in the first place. But it is also what we were saying before, that you have to, you know, you have to kind of up it in stages. That yes, it is sitting around in the park, but at least they've left the house and gone to the park. Because at the moment they don't have anything to do like that, and then they just stay at home. And so it does improve their activity levels in that way. And we have to meet them where they are to some degree. But I do also think the point about skate parks is, yes, they are a deterrent for teenage girls, and we have to acknowledge that they are. That I think the situation in Bath is oddly slightly different. I think Bath and Bristol has a better skateboarding scene than a lot of places in the country. But having talked to girls in the north of England who have had rape threats and things like that, they feel that skate parks are, you know, they're actually a problem. You know, they're actually causing behaviour that keeps teenage girls out of the park. So.
Sorry, Vicky, you're on mute there. Sorry, did you?
No, I just said thank you. Okay.
I will just show you quickly something though, because we are also working on what a more inclusive skate park might look like. Have I got it on the? I can do it in glorious fly through actually. No, that's not it. Here we go. Right, let's share this. Because there are also problems with the design of skate parks that mean that they because of their bowl shape and the arena-ness of it, they can be very off-putting to girls who feel that they're just everyone's staring at them and they're going to perform, but also because they tend to be tucked away in the corner. So they did a lot of research on Sweden in this. So we've been working with the skate park designer to create a more inclusive skate park. So it has the path running through it so that there's constantly people coming and going. It's got spaces for beginners, it's got hidden spaces, it's got a cafe as part of it, it's got other equipment, it's got little beginners bits for you know, kids scooting through with their mums can just try out a bit. So there are also other ways of doing skate parks and creating better parks that include wheeled sports that you know, may work better for everybody, including girls. And the other question about wheeled sports is nobody ever builds anything for roller skates, where lots of girls like roller skating. So thinking not just about skate parks, but also wheeled sports parks that are more inclusive to all forms of wheeled sports.
Okay. Yeah, we've had another comment from Reze. Spending time in nature or sitting and social interactions have mental health benefits. So that's obviously incredibly important. I think we discussed that when we were planning this, that the mental health impacts of being outside is a major bonus. And like you say, walking to the park and having that social interaction could be incredibly important.
Yes, and I'm sure if you've seen the recent Wellcome Trust review of the literature about access to green space for teenagers and young people, there isn't much sex disaggregated data in it, but overall they are, it's absolutely clear that even a short amount of time in green space has a significant positive effect on mental health, and that, that's very clear from that piece of work. So yes, even just getting them out there. I also think we're kind of quite like, oh, teenagers must be doing something useful in parks. We don't tell old people to do something useful in parks. They're allowed to just go and sit on benches, and that's okay. That it's about being in public space and being part of the community is also part of it. And I think we can get a little fixated on the activity levels rather than just encouraging them to be in public space.
Okay, Stephanie, you have a hand up.
Hi, thank you, Susanna. Your presentation was really interesting. I mean, some of the things that you brought up there are things that seem so obvious, and yet we don't really think about that. What I wanted to ask was, what are the major because you'd think, like I said, these things seem so obvious. Are there certain red tape that are holding back these very obvious solutions? I mean, maybe things like the fact that a playground is so kind of concentrated and fenced off because that's a regulation that is necessary for children under the age of 12 to play in, or what are some of these major, or are there any major red tape things that are just kind of holding back making more diverse and inclusive play spaces?
I think the biggest obstacle is the one that you said. It's really obvious, but I hadn't thought of it. I don't think anybody is setting out to be willfully obstructive. It's just that they have not seen it. And that's kind of why we're here, because that was my reaction. It's like, oh my God, I've never thought about it, but it's outrageous. This is what's going on. And genuinely, 85 to 90% of the people we speak to just go, oh my goodness, I haven't seen it. What can we do to fix this? So that is, to me, the single biggest obstacle. I think there are other problems for councils to do with, firstly, they don't have a huge amount of money, and you're asking them to take a risk on something they don't know. If you order a Muga and you go to a Muga supplier, you're going to get a Muga, and everybody knows what that is, and it will be delivered on a certain budget, and you'll get a thing. It is a more difficult thing to ask them to do, which is why we're working with it in a few places, and the bureaucracy is slow, but where we're making small interventions in parks, we really want to publicize them, to say, look, this was done and it's okay. That's kind of where we're at the moment, is to try and get just a few UK examples through, so that to reassure councils that they're not going to be spending their money on a waste of money. And maintenance is a huge issue. Skate parks and Mugas are relatively maintenance free. Things like swings aren't, and it's easier for them to get capital money than it is to get day-to-day refurbishment money. So that's one of the biggest obstacles at the moment. And I think the other obstacle is just not the classic park. We've asked the users what they want. That sort of self-reflexive loop gets in the way of people doing it. Vicky said about fencing of play areas, absolutely. The dog thing is really important, and dog owners seem to think that they're a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, unlike both religion and teenagers. But also, I think there's an oversight in the need. I think the other thing that's really important is we need to get over ourselves vis-a-vis teenagers, because there's all the play areas that say no children over 12. Teenagers have a right to play, they have a right to be in the park, but their form of play, which may be hanging around and joshing with their friends, that it's essential for their development, but we see it as loitering. As I said, nobody ever goes around to the old people and says, why are you loitering in the park, just sitting there on the benches? That's what they need for their development. And so we just kind of have to get over ourselves a bit. But also, if we bring them into the community of the park and actually put their facilities nearer other people, maybe they won't be so antisocial. And there's a really, I'm just saying very quickly, and this can work through design. There's a really interesting thing in Aberystwyth where there's a bit of a skate park, and then they've created this massive, long, wide skatable space that leads in and out of it. And this came out of consultations with the community where the old people said, oh, the young people don't even notice we're there. And the young people were going, it would be great if the old people didn't tut at us all the time. So they created a space where they had to share the space and had to acknowledge it. And actually, everybody is happier as a result of it. It has worked on a small scale. People feel more like a community sharing the same space. So, you know, these design interventions can make a difference in that way. But I think really it's just a lot of attitudes and a lot of not thinking. I mean, basically, most councils are really pleased they've thought about teenagers, and they're a bit shocked to discover that a skate park doesn't cater for everybody. And that Amuga doesn't cater for everybody, and it's not out of any ill will, it's just out of an absence of thought.
Well, the kind of copy-paste Muga or copy-paste skate park, you know, they can be intervened in and diversified, yes. and things can be added in to make them, but that's,
I think the other thing is, very specifically with skate parks, is that the manufacturers, for perfectly good commercial reasons, are very good at monetizing or organizing the pressure groups. You get a small group of people who want it, and they literally, the skate park builders will organize the funding, they will organize the petition to the council. You know, there's nobody doing that for teenage girls.
Thank you.
We have a question from Alice.
Yeah, we're saying when we got everybody on. Hi, first of all, thanks very much. That was fascinating. Really interesting stuff. I wanted to ask about your community engagement. We were doing some community engagement ourselves, and you were talking about getting girls involved with the design process. Do you have any examples of how you did that? Like, how did you find your teenage girls? Like, did you just go to schools, or did you hang around and sort of find them, especially talking to them individually? I thought that could be potentially quite difficult if they are maybe a bit shyer or don't want to be approached, or, you know, anything like that.
Yes, there's a lot. How long is a piece of string? The best results have come from either working with schools, because you can do a really interesting, particularly with design and technology classes. We've done, because they're really happy to have a real life design project to be talking about, and we've been bringing in young architects and landscape designers to work with them on the project. This was for I've been working on Brickfields Park in Bath, and there's a girls' school nearby, so they've been doing some research on the park. We did a couple of workshops with them. Like I said, we brought in local young architects to actually realise their designs, but also to have long, open-ended conversations, because they said they don't know what they want. They've never had it. So we have a relatively good structure for a kind of 2/3 of a day workshop that works with doing some exploratory work first and then bringing in design professionals after lunch, not to tell them what to do, but to give them the confidence to create something that actually looks like what they want, rather than just going, oh, I can't do this, it's all terrible, I wanted to do something nice and it all looks horrible. And we're also working with Julia King at the LSE, who's done much more longer form workshops with teenagers and is adapting that to work with teenage girls. So we're doing a project with one set of teenagers in Crewe and one in Trowbridge, and those have come through the local schools and colleges as well. The key thing is actually to pay them a bit, even just a small amount. This is a paid apprenticeship, the LSE work. With some of the other ones, we've done some workshops in Bradford, where there's a really good thing called, do you know Join Us Move Play in Bradford? Where they're working to increase, it's Bradford Teaching Hospitals Trust thing, where they're working in the community to increase activity levels with children 5 to 14. So we're kind of on the tail end of that. And they have money for interventions in parks, which is really interesting. So we've been doing some workshops with teenage girls for them, but because they have a whole community network, then they can, you know, they find it relatively easy to whistle up a group of teenage girls. Going to existing groups is the number one. Going through schools is the best way. Trying to organise a group through the park when they don't go to the park, bitter experience. like pulling teeth, please don't try and do it. But yeah, schools are really good. And if you pay them 25 quid of Love to Shop voucher, they will really turn up for you.
Thanks very much. That's great.
And if you want to talk to me afterwards, we've got an outline of our workshop that I could send over to you.
I would be fascinated in that. Yes, please. Yeah,
Yes.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all your questions. I think that's probably close. A couple of people have already had to go to other meetings, so they said thank you very much. So I'd just like to sort of draw it to close now, and thank Susanna for her time. I think that for me was absolutely fascinating, and certainly for our project, I can see the benefits of just thinking in a slightly different way about how we design our interventions and try and work out all the little, like I said, small design changes we can make, and also sort of changes to policy to really sort of bring forward and think about how we make those differences. And like I say, I have that vested interest of having a daughter, and who at the moment being 10 still active, but I want to make sure that the spaces we create are there for her in the future.
Yeah, and we are very much here to collaborate. That's what we do. We you're looking at one half of MakeSpaceForGirls, so really that's the only way we get anything done. So if people have specific questions or specific projects they'd like us to input into, we're really happy to do that, or questions about consultation, anything like that, drop us a line. There's lots of stuff on the website, but there's also lots of stuff we've got, and just sort of knowledge that we're very happy to share, because that's what we do.
And hopefully start planning for other webinars, bringing sort of other ideas in. So I'll be making contact. So if you want to sign up, leave your email address with myself or Leah at the end. We can sort of let you know sort of the next time we're planning for the next webinar.
Yes, I'm just going to put my email address into the thing, and then anybody can ask me anything at any point, up to a point. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you for having me. Really good to see you all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.